Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be discussing the recent NHL trade rumors surrounding Patrick Kane and a potential trade to the Colorado Avalanche. Now, the NHL trade deadline is less than 2 weeks away and things have gotten even more spicy over the past week. But one of the biggest rumors coming out over the past week has been regarding the Chicago Blackhawks and their potential treatment of Patrick Kane in the future, whether they could potentially move him to a bigger contender and if Kane would want to leave the Chicago Blackhawks, and there's been a lot of info on that specifically. So, when it comes to Patrick Kane, could we see a trade as close as this NHL trade deadline? What would that trade look like, and will the Colorado Avalanche be the team to make this deal happen? Watch till the end for all the trade rumors and all the news, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of the people that are watching are not subscribed, so if you like hockey content, this channel is the place to be. Now, as we know, over the past couple of weeks, instead of hiring a new GM, the Blackhawks removed the interim tag from Kyle Davidson and made him the next GM of the Chicago Blackhawks full-time. And one of the things that Kyle Davidson stressed was the fact that this rebuild is going to happen. It's been an inevitability, and that the Chicago Blackhawks team will rebuild this core and hopefully get them back into playoff contention in a couple years' time. That is the plan for this Blackhawks team, and that leaves the future of guys like Patrick Kane, Marc-Andre, Fleury, Jonathan Toews in true question. And out of all those guys, Patrick Kane is certainly the most enticing piece. Now, we've had some confirmed reports that the Blackhawks met with Kane, they met with Toews to tell them about this direction and make everything perfectly clear. So at this point, it feels like if Patrick Kane wants to move and wants to go to a contender, that could be his choice, and he could end up removing or waiving his no-move clause and going to a true Stanley Cup contender. And we got some reports from David Pagnotta talking about this situation and the one team that could definitely make a run for him even as soon as this year.
They want to strike while the iron's hot, and they want to go after and kind of go all in going into the postseason. They're looking at a variety of different options, primarily up front, and they're one of the teams that has reached out to Chicago to say, hey, if you're in a position and Patty Kane is looking to move, give us a call. We want to make that happen.
But on paper for the Colorado Avalanche, just with the lineup they have, it does make quite a bit of sense when you just look at the positions the Avalanche have. If they do instead go for a Patrick Kane instead of a guy like a Claude Giroux, their top six looks insanely interesting. You got Andre Burakovsky, Nathan MacKinnon, and Mikko Rantanen as the first line right now. For the second line, though, you would have Gabriel Landeskog, Nazem Kadri, and Patrick Kane. You'd then move down Valeri Nichushkin to the third line, which is even more nasty since Nichushkin is a great player too, but the Avalanche would have even more options, especially on that bottom six. Just in terms of pure offense, especially on the power play, the Avalanche would be unstoppable with Patrick Kane, and especially with his passing ability, to have goal scorers like Nazem Kadri on the same line makes a lot of sense. Now, it also brings up the point of Patrick Kane's play as of this year, and even though I think his even strength play has took a little bit of a nosedive, his finishing ability has still been fantastic alongside of Alex DeBrincat finishing a lot of his great passing. In 53 games, he has 18 goals, 40 assists for 58 points, and still, again, even though I think his even strength play offensively has gotten a little bit less consistent, his passing, his playmaking ability is still of the elite in the NHL, and for the Colorado Avalanche to have that still on their second line would be miraculous for them. And also at the same time, the last time Kane made the playoffs with the Blackhawks team back in 2020, where they got past the Oilers in the play-in round, he was one of the biggest reasons why, getting 9 points, 2 goals, 7 assists in 9 games played, being pretty miraculous there. And if he does translate that type of play onto this Avalanche team, then come playoff time offensively, we know he's going to be money and going to be a huge part of this Avs team going forward. Now, we know that Patrick Kane offensively can fit pretty well in Colorado's system, but what would the Avalanche have to give up to make this type of trade happen? Well, first things first, again, they have about $3.8 million in cap space for the deadline, and to bring in a player like Patrick Kane, let's just assume the Blackhawks will not retain any salary to make this deal happen, which I think is a little bit unrealistic. They might retain a little bit of salary, maybe $2 million on the deal, but let's just say the $10.5 million is coming back to Colorado. The Avs would have to have some pretty big salary cap shenanigans to make this work, but there are some pretty easy options to let go. Now, when it comes to the actual mock trade itself, of course, the Colorado Avalanche will receive Patrick Kane, but in exchange, This is the big one. The Chicago Blackhawks will receive defenseman Samuel Girard, forward J.T. Compher, a 2023 first-rounder since the Avs don't have their 2022 one, since they traded that into Darcy Kemper trade a year ago. And on top of that, I have Alex Newhook going back and Justin Barron. There is a lot here for the Chicago Blackhawks to sink their teeth into. You got a top 4 defenseman. You got a decent depth player. You got a first-round pick a year ahead of time, and you got a top forward prospect and a pretty solid defensive prospect as well. But that to me is kind of the general area that you would have to give for a player like Patrick Kane personally. A lot of that is the name value, but at the same time, his passing and playmaking is still among the elites in the NHL. And for a team like the Avalanche, especially in the same division as Chicago, I think they'd have to give up the most amount possible. It was the same reason why for the Sabres, they didn't want to get rid of Jack Eichel to the Rangers, and the Rangers would have to pay the prettiest penny to make this deal happen. That to me is the same way with this Chicago team, and even though of course they will be rebuilding during that time, I still don't think they want to have the Avalanche having Patrick Kane for the foreseeable future. They'd much rather have him in the Eastern Conference if possible, and I think that's why you'll have to pay even more, potentially a Justin Barron type player on top of the package already to make that deal happen. But personally, if I was Chicago and I had this potential offer and Patrick Kane was willing to go to Colorado, I would be taking this deal every day of the week. You get pretty much everything you need. You get that top 4 defenseman, you get a top forward in the future, another top defenseman in the future, you get a decent depth player that can already play on your team, and you have a first round pick a year ahead of time in the stacked 2023 draft. To me, there's a lot of reasons for both teams to make this deal, and again, the Avalanche truly want to add to that offense and add a franchise player. Patrick Kane is the best available bet. But here's the thing, I know I just said for the Avalanche that Patrick Kane would be the best available bet, but personally for me, I don't think I would trade for Patrick Kane if I were the Avalanche, and that might be a little bit of a hot take since we have this very cool idea out there, and I know I'm playing devil's advocate, but at the same time, if I was the Avalanche and I were trying to fill that second line role, I don't know if I would be looking at Patrick Kane as the guy. We know that this Avalanche team offensively on that top 6 is set. Even though you add Patrick Kane, they'd be pretty much unstoppable. At the same time, you still do need to look out for the defensive side of things and the physical side of things, especially. Yes, Nazem Kadri and Gabriel Landeskog especially can add to that already, but defensively, I don't think there's any player in this top 6 that's really amazing. Mikko Rantanen maybe is the closest, but I don't think he's going to be a defensive stalwart in the playoffs, especially. I feel like the Avalanche could use a great two-way forward on that second line right wing. And when we look at players across the league, there are very few players out there that are worse defensively than Patrick Kane. And going back to that last playoff series in the second round last year, going to those 4 consecutive games that they lost, they were outscored 17-8. And although the offense was a part of that, I felt like the goaltending and the defense wasn't as good as it needed to be either. They had the momentum on their side, but they just didn't have the consistency to complete it. And personally, if this Avs team is able to add somebody that can play strong defense and be a lot more of a forward-checking forward, I feel like they'd have a lot more success come playoff time. And this might be, again, another hot take in this video, but I think for the Chicago Blackhawks, or the Colorado Avalanche rather, if they want to have more success in the playoffs, I would go for a different Blackhawks forward and trade for Brandon Hagel. I know it might be a hot take here, but personally, I think Hagel fits what the Avalanche need a lot better, and he can play on that second line, be one of the best forward-checking and back-checking forwards they have in the entire lineup. In fact, I think he might be the best player to do something like that. He's shown his strong defensive results and consistency. He's a player that works hard every single shift, and I feel like for the Avs, especially on that top 6, that's something that they can use in every single minute of the game. And I feel like Brandon Hagel, even though he would also be pretty expensive, maybe a first and a potential prospect on top of that, I feel like for the Avs, if they get somebody like that, it increases their playoff chances of making the Stanley Cup and winning it a lot more than Patrick Kane does. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning are a great example of this, how they traded for JT Miller, looking for this offensive player to boost them in the playoffs, and it didn't really work correctly. And then after he was gone, they traded for Blake Coleman and then Barclay Goodrow, players that play more of that playoff style game, and they won back-to-back Stanley Cups, being huge parts of that middle 6. And although I'm not saying that Brandon Hagel can be that exactly, he can be a pretty similar similar player in line with those guys and be close to the Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow of this trade deadline. And in my opinion, the biggest reason why the Avs should trade for Brandon Hagel to fix a lot of their problems is also the cap that he has. He makes $1.5 million for the next 3 years and will also be an RFA when that deal expires. Pretty much the perfect option, cap-wise, for a team like the Avalanche. Okay, Hat, I was trying to make a point. Going back to Hagel's cap hit at $1.5 million for the next 3 years, that's a perfect situation for Avs team that needs to save every single penny. And especially potentially with Nazem Kadri escaping in free agency, they could use another forward that's again on that lower cap hit to be able to protect that top six. And that to me is the perfect situation. He's 23, he has the amazing cap hit, he plays the style that they need more of in the playoffs. To me, he'd be worth every penny you pay. And also, again, comparing the trades that you have to make with the Kane trade, you have to trade a guy like a Girard or a Comfer or other players like Alex Newhook or who are NHL depth pieces right now. Compared to Hagel, you could probably get rid of a first and probably a decent prospect in the system and call it a day. You don't lose anything on the roster right now, which I think is the most important part for this Avs team. You could have less depth and a more star offensive player, or you could have more depth. You can have this player that plays more of a playoff game and is more likely to win you those playoff tight games, especially if they were to go to overtime. To me, it's a slam dunk. You go for Brandon Hagel, the cheaper and better playoff option. And to me, for the Avalanche, if they trade for Patrick Kane, to me, they're kind of just redoing the same mistakes. If they trade for Patrick Kane, I don't think they're winning the Stanley Cup, and I don't think they're getting to the Stanley Cup final with that much of a defensive black hole in their top six again. To me, there are some holes on this Avalanche team in the playoffs, and I feel like Hagel would fix a decent chunk of those. He wouldn't win them the Stanley Cup automatically, but I think if they do trade for Brandon Hagel, they get to the Stanley Cup final at least, and I think they potentially win it. They're definitely up there, and I feel like for the Avs, if they want to contend, they got to do themselves right and get a player who can play in the playoffs and be consistent and dependable and play in every situation. But it's honestly pretty frustrating. I mean, even as a Stars fan, obviously I don't want them to win the Cups at all, but with this core, with this amazing Avalanche team, they should be winning cups pretty much, or at least be in contention to win cups every single year. The fact that they haven't gone past the second round, in my opinion, does not get talked about enough. This Avs team in the playoffs has been an absolute failure up to this point. And to me, you have the obvious solution and the blueprint in the Tampa Bay Lightning, who decided to stop going after these all-offensive forwards and start building out that depth and building with more playoff-ready players. And the proof is in the pudding. They went after guys like Goudreau, they went after guys like Coleman, and those guys were so critical in bringing them the Stanley Cup wins. To me, it's what Colorado should do, it's what they should prioritize, and again, Patrick Kane is kind of the opposite of that. It's not to say that he can't win the Cup there in Colorado, but at the same time, I think there are much better decisions the Avalanche can make on the same team. If they get Brandon Hagel, I think the Avalanche will win the Cup, and I don't think it'll be close. They will be a dominant team if they do the right thing. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy this breakdown, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Comment down below what your guys' thoughts are. Do you want to see Patrick Kane in Colorado? Or do you think I'm wrong? What do you think of my mock trade as well? Do you think it's realistic or not? Do you think the Avs should trade for Patrick Kane or Brandon Hagel or somebody else? Let me know your thoughts down below. And let me know what you guys think a Patrick Kane trade would actually look like as well. Make sure you share your thoughts down in the comments down below and share this video with your friends. Get the Kane trade rumors out there and click on this trade, oh my gosh, I cannot talk, this card for all of my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.